You don't need a flight number page, because you aren't going. My father's voice cut through the applause at his anniversary dinner, loud enough for all 30 guests to hear, as he pointed his champagne glass at me and laughed, saying someone had to stay behind to feed the dogs and watch my sister's kids, and that this was my job. He didn't say it like a request, he said it like he was speaking to a servant. My mother smoothed her napkin and looked away, and my sister Brittany just smirked. In that moment, 30 people watched my own family decide I wasn't worth a seat on the plane, and as I stood there humiliated, my hand brushed against my phone while they thought they were putting me in my place, not realizing they had just left me alone with their financial records. Before I tell you what I found in my father's safe that night and how I used it to turn their paradise into a federal prison, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I want to see how far this story travels. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. 30 people holding their breath, waiting for the explosion, expecting tears or a flipped table or a scream from a 32-year-old woman being treated like an indentured servant, and my mother was gripping the tablecloth with white knuckles, bracing for the scene that would ruin her perfect evening. A part of me wanted to give them exactly that, to shatter every crystal glass in the room, but I didn't. I just stood there completely still. Brittany broke the silence, walking over with her heels clicking on the hardwood floor and thrusting a 3-inch thick binder into my chest, telling me with fake sweetness that it was the itinerary for the dogs and the kids, that the twins needed their humidifier set to exactly 68 degrees, and the dogs only ate organic lamb mix warm for 15 seconds, and that I better not mess it up. I looked at the binder and then at my father, who was watching me with a smug, expectant grin because he wanted me to fight or beg, knowing that if I fought he could call me dramatic, and if I begged he could call me weak, and he wanted the satisfaction of denying me. So I did the one thing none of them expected and smiled, said okay, took the binder, told them I understood, and wished them a wonderful trip. The relief in the room was immediate. My father's chest puffed out as he clapped a heavy, condescending hand on my shoulder and told me I was a good girl and that he knew I'd see reason because families make sacrifices, thinking I had submitted and not understanding what I was actually doing. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called strategic compliance, what you do when you're trapped in a cage with a predator bigger and stronger than you, where you don't bare your teeth or attack but lower your head. Make yourself look small and harmless, and let them believe they have total control because arrogance makes people sloppy and leaves cage doors unlocked. If I had screamed, he would have kicked me out, taken my keys, hired security, but by accepting that binder and the humiliation, I bought myself access, agreeing not to be a babysitter but to be left alone inside his empire for 7 unsupervised days. I held that binder like a holy text, nodded as my mother added more chores, watering orchids, collecting mail, waiting for the pool cleaner, thanked them for trusting me, and felt not fear but a cold electric anticipation because they were leaving me in the house with my father's private servers and physical files they thought I was too stupid to understand. When the dinner ended and guests whispered about how graceful I was, my father warned me not to let him down, and I promised I'd do exactly what needed to be done. A double meaning he didn't catch as he went to bed believing he was king of the world, unaware he had just handed the executioner the axe. Most people in Greenwich saw me as a failure, a 32-year-old woman in her parents' guest cottage, driving a 10-year-old sedan. My mother saying I was finding myself and Brittany telling her friends I was basically the help, while the truth was buried in an encrypted server in the basement because for 5 years I had been the shadow CFO of my father Richard's construction empire. He believed laws were suggestions for poor people and built his wealth on cut corners, under-the-table labor, and shell companies to hide assets from the IRS, but he was terrible at math, and when the walls started closing in 5 years ago, he didn't hire a firm because firms ask questions, so he came to me, poured cheap wine, told me it was my duty to organize the books or lose everything, and I became the fixer. While Brittany flaunted designer bags bought with laundered money, I stayed up until 4 a.m. creating paper trails, managing offshore accounts, cleaning up disasters caused by Tyler's fake startups, living in constant low-grade terror as my father made me sign documents as the responsible party so the collapse would land on me, and I did it believing I was saving the family and earning my place at the table. That illusion died 3 years ago when I was shredding documents and saw an email thread labeled a page problem, read my father's words calling me too scared to leave and too ugly to marry, cheaper than a firm and the perfect fall guy if the feds came. And in that moment I didn't cry or scream but felt a cold clarity, realizing I was a human shield. And that was the night the daughter died and the auditor was born. Because I kept working but stopped fixing and started documenting, copying. Every ledger, email, and transfer, smiling at dinners and babysitting because a doormat sees every dirty shoe. And tonight, with the house empty and their flight departing, I wasn't stepping aside anymore. I was opening the door and letting the consequences in. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read my father's words, telling Tyler not to worry about me asking for a salary because I was too scared to leave and too ugly to get married, cheaper than a firm and their free insurance policy, and that if the feds ever came knocking they would say I went rogue because I was the perfect patsy. I didn't cry or scream. I just sat there in the glow of the monitor as a cold, metallic clarity washed over me, realizing they didn't love me or even like me, that I was nothing more than a human shield they were fattening up for the slaughter, and that was the night the audit began. I didn't quit or confront them. I went back to work, but I stopped fixing their mistakes and started documenting them, spending the next 3 years copying every ledger, every incriminating email, every bank transfer, building a digital archive of their crimes while smiling at family dinners, babysitting their children, and letting them treat me like a doormat because a doormat is the one thing in the house that sees everyone's dirty shoes. They thought I was dependent on them, never realizing I was the only thing standing between them and a federal indictment. And tonight, with the house empty and the flight to paradise departing, I wasn't going to stand aside anymore. I was going to open the door and let the consequences in. The morning of departure was pure chaos as the sun struggled to rise over the manicured lawns of Greenwich, and my sister Brittany screamed about a vintage Hermes scarf, tearing apart the guest room and throwing silk and cashmere across the floor like a tornado in a boutique, while Tyler sat on the edge of the bed wearing sunglasses indoors and nursing a hangover that smelled like top-shelf bourbon and bad decisions. Brittany shrieked my name, demanding the blue scarf because she couldn't go to Hawaii without it since it matched her bikini, and I walked in, reached under the pile of clothes beside her, pulled it out, and handed it over without a word as she snatched it, stuffed it into her Louis Vuitton carry-on, and told me to be more organized next time. Downstairs the foyer was stacked with enough luggage for a year, not a week, my mother barking instructions at the private driver about her hatbox, while the air reeked of expensive perfume and stress. When my father called me into the study, and I followed him into his sanctuary, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind us. He went behind his massive desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a stack of thick, unopened IRS notices, tossing them onto the mahogany surface, where they slid to a stop in front of me as he calmly said they were flagging payroll discrepancies in Tyler's startup, and that I needed to make them go away while they were gone. I knew exactly what they were, because I'd warned him 6 months earlier that moving cash between shell companies would trigger a flag, but now he wanted a miracle, and when I said they looked serious if payroll was being audited, his eyes went cold as he snapped at me to fix it and reminded me that my signature was on those returns, that if the ship went down I was the captain, and he was just the investor, suggesting I get very creative, or I'd look terrible in an orange jumpsuit. It was a plain threat, a reminder that he'd set me up years ago to take the fall, and as he pulled a small brass key from his pocket and handed it to me, telling me all the hard copies were in the filing cabinet and to sort it out, then walked away. The key felt heavy in my hand like a weapon. By 8 o'clock the limo was loaded, my mother checking her makeup, Brittany already posting a paradise-bound selfie, when my father paused at the door and demanded my house key, waving off my hesitation by saying I was staying all week, didn't need to come and go, and that with my stress he didn't want security risks. A power move meant to lock me in and remind me he controlled my world even from 3,000 miles away. And I handed it over as he called me a good girl and climbed into the limo. I stood there as the door slammed shut and watched the car disappear through the iron gates, laughing and drinking champagne on their way to paradise, convinced they'd left their servant behind to clean up their messes, never realizing they'd locked themselves out. I turned back to the empty house and saw it for what it was, not a prison but a crime scene, and for the first time in 5 years the detective had free rein. So I locked the door, went straight to the study, and as the taillights vanished around the bend the daughter died and the auditor was born. I didn't wave goodbye or unpack. I inserted the brass key into the filing cabinet and felt it click open. Knowing my father thought this was a punishment and that I'd spend the week saving him, forgetting the first rule of accounting that the person who cleans the mess knows exactly where the dirt is buried, as I sat at his computer, typed his predictable password, bypassed the decoy files, opened the hidden partition, and found the shadow ledger, a masterpiece of fraud detailing 5 years of double booking, ghost employees, and construction materials expensed to projects that never existed. Right at the top of the recent expenses, I found a folder labeled Board Retreat Hawaii. I clicked it open and saw that he had expensed the entire vacation, the first-class flights, the villas, the private chefs, as a mandatory business seminar. Corporate funds were paying for Brittany's tan. It was blatant tax fraud, and it was the final nail in his coffin. I didn't just read it, I took it all. I plugged in my own encrypted black hard drive and mirrored the entire system. Every email, every forged invoice, every offshore transfer. The progress bar crawled across the screen, green and steady. While it copied digitally, I tackled the physical evidence, emptying the filing cabinet of the original deeds and the page problem printouts, packing them into a waterproof banker's bag. When the download finished, I pulled the drive and meticulously wiped the keyboard, desk surface, and door handle. I wasn't just leaving. I was erasing myself. I wanted him to return to a house that felt like a tomb. I walked into the kitchen where Brittany had left the binder of chores, dog food schedules, and the twins' humidifier instructions on the marble island. It looked absurd now, a relic from a life I no longer lived. I placed the brass key from the filing cabinet on top of it, then stuck a yellow sticky note on the leather cover with 4 simple words. Consider this my resignation. I grabbed my bag, not the duffel of clothes my mother expected, but a secure case containing 5 years' worth of felonies. I walked out the front door and left it unlocked, letting the security alarm chirp. It wasn't my house to protect anymore. I drove my sedan to JFK, bypassing the economy lot, pulling up to the first-class curb, handing the keys to a valet, and walking into the terminal. I wasn't flying to Hawaii to beg for scraps. At the counter, the agent asked, "Business or pleasure, Miss Dixon?" I looked at the black bag on my shoulder, heavy with enough evidence to put 3 people in federal prison for a decade. "Business," I said. "Strictly business." 2 days later, I stood in a room that smelled of expensive perfume and old money. My Aunt Teresa's design studio in San Francisco was more than a building. It was a sanctuary of high art and even higher tax brackets. She was hosting a private pop-up to introduce me to her inner circle, not as her niece, but as a financial consultant for the elite. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wearing an apron or polyester. I wore a silk structural gown Teresa had designed, held a glass of vintage champagne, and finally breathed. "You look like you belong here," she whispered, squeezing my arm. No one would guess I'd spent the last decade filing receipts for a construction company. I smiled, feeling the phantom weight of the binder lift from my chest. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. Then the double doors at the gallery burst open violently, making the crystal chandeliers tremble. The music stopped, chatter died, and every head turned. My father and Tyler stood in the doorway, looking like a car crash in a museum, still in their vacation clothes, linen shirts stained with sweat, faces peeling red from sunburn. They weren't alone. Flanking them were 2 massive men in dark tactical gear, the kind of security you hire to hurt someone without leaving a police report. My father barreled into the gallery with guards blocking the exits, screaming for them to grab me, accusing me in front of horrified guests of stealing $50,000 in diamonds and hard drives to cover his crimes. Tyler threatened to call the police unless I handed over the bag. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope and told them I wasn't a thief. I was a whistleblower. The drives were already with the IRS and FBI. Touching me meant tampering with a federal witness. The guards backed off immediately. My father paled as I listed his crimes. Offshore accounts, fake payroll shell companies, and even the Hawaii trip he claimed was a business retreat. The room turned against him. Guests began dialing lawyers. Aunt Teresa ordered him out, and as he staggered outside, federal agents arrived to arrest him and Tyler. The investigation seized houses, cars, and hidden funds. My parents and sister were left broke. Richard and Tyler received 5 years for tax evasion and fraud. I collected $3.6 to $6 million under the whistleblower program and bought Aunt Teresa's building. I realized my father was never powerful, only loud, leveraged, and funded by stolen money. When it vanished, so did he. Now I own my life, my work, and my future. Family isn't blood. It's the people who honor trust, respect, and integrity. No one would guess I'd spent the last decade filing receipts for a construction company. I smiled, feeling the phantom weight of the binder lift from my chest. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. Then the double doors at the gallery burst open violently, making the crystal chandeliers tremble. The music stopped, chatter died, and every head turned. My father and Tyler stood in the doorway, looking like a car crash in a museum, still in their vacation clothes, linen shirts stained with sweat, faces peeling red from sunburn. They weren't alone. Flanking them were two massive men in dark tactical gear, the kind of security you hire to hurt someone without leaving a police report. My father barreled into the gallery with guards blocking the exits, screaming for them to grab me, accusing me in front of horrified guests of stealing $50,000 in diamonds and hard drives to cover his crimes. Tyler threatened to call the police unless I handed over the bag. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope and told them I wasn't a thief. I was a whistleblower. The drives were all ready with the IRS and FBI. Touching me meant tampering with a federal witness. The guards backed off immediately. My father paled as I listed his crimes: offshore accounts, fake payroll shell companies, and even the Hawaii trip he claimed was a business retreat. The room turned against him. Guests began dialing lawyers. Aunt Teresa ordered him out, and as he staggered outside, federal agents arrived to arrest him and Tyler. The investigation seized houses, cars, and hidden funds. My parents and sister were left broke. Richard and Tyler received 5 years for tax evasion and fraud. I collected $3.6 to $6 million under the whistleblower program and bought Aunt Teresa's building. I realized my father was never powerful, only loud, leveraged, and funded by stolen money. When it vanished, so did he. Now I own my life, my work, and my future. Family isn't blood. It's the people who honor trust, respect, and integrity. No one would guess I'd spent the last decade filing receipts for a construction company. I smiled, feeling the phantom weight of the binder lift from my chest. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. Then the double doors at the gallery burst open violently, making the crystal chandeliers tremble. The music stopped, chatter died, and every head turned. My father and Tyler stood in the doorway, looking like a car crash in a museum, still in their vacation clothes, linen shirts stained with sweat, faces peeling red from sunburn. They weren't alone. Flanking them were two massive men in dark tactical gear, the kind of security you hire to hurt someone without leaving a police report. My father barreled into the gallery with guards blocking the exits, screaming for them to grab me, accusing me in front of horrified guests of stealing $50,000 in diamonds and hard drives to cover his crimes. Tyler threatened to call the police unless I handed over the bag. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope and told them I wasn't a thief. I was a whistleblower. The drives were all ready with the IRS and FBI. Touching me meant tampering with a federal witness. The guards backed off immediately. My father paled as I listed his crimes: offshore accounts, fake payroll shell companies, and even the Hawaii trip he claimed was a business retreat. The room turned against him. Guests began dialing lawyers. Aunt Teresa ordered him out, and as he staggered outside, federal agents arrived to arrest him and Tyler. The investigation seized houses, cars, and hidden funds. My parents and sister were left broke. Richard and Tyler received 5 years for tax evasion and fraud. I collected $3.6 to $6 million under the whistleblower program and bought Aunt Teresa's building. I realized my father was never powerful, only loud, leveraged, and funded by stolen money. When it vanished, so did he. Now I own my life, my work, and my future. Family isn't blood. It's the people who honor trust, respect, and integrity.